Hello everyone and welcome back to the remaining part of the previous lecture World War One. In this video we'll be looking into the reasons behind US entry to the World War One, that why US abandoned the policy of neutrality and joined the global war. Apart from this, one of the most important event of World War One was the Russian Revolution and how Russia left the war. We'll be looking into the after effects and aftermath of the war, the peace treaties, the consequences of the war, and the legacy of World War One. So this was a small overview. So let's begin with part two. World War One was transformed into a global war. This just did not affect Europe. Battles were also fought in Africa, in the Indian Ocean, in the Middle East. Many countries around the world sent soldiers to the battles. Colonies like Australia, India, French Indochina, which nowadays is Vietnam. These were the de facto allies with their European mother nations. De facto allies, this is a term which is used in international law. This इसका ये जो the opposite of de facto is de jure. So de facto is basically a rule that people always follow even when it's not an official procedure. So de facto states were kind of supporting their mother states during World War One, because that was the era of imperialism. ठीक है, तो small and weaker states were colonized by the stronger states. Small states were the colonies of great powers, and de jure likewise the opposite of de facto, in which everything is under the rule of law and it's in the official procedure. So जो de facto states थे ना, smaller and weaker states, they were supporting their mother nations, the European nations. ठीक है, Japan fought with its allies, and many countries believed that they would be granted independence if they helped their colonizers win the World War One. क्योंकि ये एक बैकड्रॉप भी है वर्ल्ड वॉर वन का कि तब तो सब कॉन्टिनेंट था ना, कि इंडियन सब कॉन्टिनेंट था, पाकिस्तान को इंडिपेंडेंस नहीं मिली थी, तो वो मतलब ग्रेट ब्रिटेन ने कन्विंस किया था मुस्लिम्स और मुस्लिम्स को कि अगर आप हमारी मदद करेंगे तो हम जो आपका ऑटोमन का जो खलीफा है ना, हम उसको बचाएंगे. तो बेसिकली वो जो है ना, इनको लालच दे रहे थे कि आप हमारी हेल्प करें. तो एट दैट टाइम इंडियन सब कॉन्टिनेंट वॉज द colony of the Great Britain. So I hope you are getting. So the next major event of the World War One was that US joined the war. मैं आपको ये बात बता दूं that both in the global wars, the World War One and World War Two, US adopted a policy of neutrality in the start, but US हमेशा जो है ना war के बीच में आ गया था. So there are several reasons as to why US entered the war. तो US जो है ना, it expressed and adopted a policy of neutrality at the beginning of World War One, and US sold weapons to the countries that were fighting, mainly Great Britain. ठीक है, US ने weaponization की सपोर्ट करा था ऐसे कंट्रीज को कि सारा बैलेंस में रहे. ठीक है, कि एक कंट्री सारी पावर कैप्चर ना करे. ठीक है, बट देयर आर सेवरल रीजंस. सम ऑफ देम आर दैट क्लोजर टाइज with the allies, क्योंकि यूएस के जो क्लोजर टाइज थे ग्रेट ब्रिटेन के साथ थे, फ्रांस के साथ थे, because they all shared same democratic and political system. There was a common language, and they all shared same history. The second reason was the German U-boats attacked against the American ships. German ने क्या किया था कि American के ships को sink कर दिया था. ठीक है, Lusitania, in which there were 128 Americans which were killed. The German interference with the US shipping, the sinking of the Lusitania. Then there was this Zimmerman's note. It was intercepted note from Germany to Mexico. Germany offered to help Mexico take back the territories which were lost to the US if they attacked America. So America जो थे ना, they were outraged when details were published in the newspaper. ये जो Zimmerman's telegram है ना, this basically convinced the US government to openly declare war against Germany in 1971. So 1971 made that was the time when US joined the war. There was another point. Reason behind the US joining the war was the Bolsheviks revolution. Bolshevik revolution ये रशिया में राइज हुआ था and that pulled out Russia out of the war. क्योंकि उसकी जो there was instability and जो monarchical government थी ना, that was destabilized. तो Bolshevik revolution आया था रशिया में. And also there the major reason behind the US joining the war was the fear of German power, because that was a possible threat to US security. क्योंकि अगर एक power emerge हो गई तो that was a threat to US. So these were the points which convinced US to that they had to join the war, because they cannot now just adopt the policy of neutrality, and they cannot abandon the policy of neutrality. They have to these reasons were basically forcing US to join the war. Then Russian Revolution. Russia, I told you the Bolshevik Revolution in the previous slide. So Russia was experiencing social and political unrest and the growing war. The Bolsheviks seized power through the Russian Revolution and ended Russia's involvement in the World War One. तो the Russian monarch जो था ना, Tsarist regime was overthrown, and that happened in 1971. It resulted in the formation of world's first communist government. The Russian Revolution in a nutshell. We consider Russian Revolution as the most important consequences of the World War One. तो इसके जो reason था ना, because if you look at the map, so Germany was fighting on the two fronts, ठीक है, the western and the eastern. On the eastern front, it was fighting with the Russia, and on the eastern front, it was fighting with France, Great Britain, and later America also entered into the war. But Russia exits the war, because from 1914 to 1916, Russian army mounted several offensive attacks in the World War One, the Eastern Front. I told you, but it was unable to break through the German allies, and over 1,700,000 Russian soldiers died in World War One. On one hand, it was defeat in the battlefield, and on the other hand, it combined with the economic instability and scarcity of food and other essentials led to the mounting discontent among the bulk of Russian population, and Russian government failed to provide further immunity to the soldiers. तो ये जो था ना, this was the reason behind the Russian Revolution, because that was the reason when Bolsheviks seized power in Russia. This increased hostility was directed towards the imperial regime of Tsar Nicholas II and his unpopular German-born wife Alexandra. जो रशियन मोनार्कियल रूलर था ना, सार्स निकोलस द सेकेंड, इसकी जो वाइफ थी दैट वाज जर्मन बॉर्न, उसका नाम था अलेक्जेंड्रा. So Russia's the growing instability exploded in the Russian Revolution in 1917, and then it was superheaded by Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks, which ended Tsarist rule and brought a halt to the Russian participant in World War One. That was the time when Russia was pulled out from the war. But 1917 and Russia was completely, it withdrew from the war. ठीक है? The new leader Vladimir called for a ceasefire, and then they reached an armistice between the Central Power and Russia. And then in early December 1917, it freed Germany troops to face the remaining allies on the Western Front. ठीक है? Now Germany, after the Russian withdrew from the war, तो इसके बाद जो है ना, फिर Germany had only the Western Front to fight on. ठीक है? Russia back off कर गया था, तो Germany was left to fight on the Western Front. And then in 1917, Russia's monarchy, Jutina, that was transformed into the world's first communist state. So this is the Russian Revolution in the nutshell. Then towards armistice, the aftermath of World War One. Towards armistice, if we look into the after effects of World War One, तो ये तो ख़त्म हो गई थी तकरीबन वर्ल्ड वॉर वन इन 1918 because by the fall of 1918 the central powers were breaking off and falling off, unraveling on all the fronts. The leaving of the war by revolutionary Russia allowed Germany to concentrate their forces on the Western Front only. And in the summer of 1918, witnessed the last desperate German attack. However, Germany was practically alone, if we see, and his allies were on the verge of economic and military exhaustion. The arrival of the US troops in Europe balanced the scale in favor of the Entente powers. क्योंकि अगर हम देखें ना तो Germany was so ambitious in the whole war क्योंकि वो अकेला ही लड़ रहा था because if we practically analyze it Austro-Hungary जो था वो तो that was falling off ठीक है Ottomans were already breaking off on all the fronts तो Germany was alone और फिर बल्गेरिया आस्क्ड द आर्मिस्टाइस उसने बस कहा कि आई वांट टू एंड द वॉर इन सितंबर देन टर्की signed treaty with the allies in 1918 and then Austro-Hungary also surrendered in the early November 1918 but despite the Turkish victory at Gallipoli later defeats by invading forces and the Arab revolt had combined to destroy the Ottoman Empire and economy it destroyed its economy and devastated its land because आपको ये Arab revolt के बारे में तो पता होगा during World War One there was this person he was a very prominent figure Thomas Edward Lawrence जिसको Lawrence of Arabia भी कहा जाता है Thomas Edward Lawrence he was a British archaeologist army officer a diplomat and a writer who became renowned for his role in the Arab Revolt, which was in 1916 to 1918 against the Ottoman Empire during World War One. इसने एक revolt की थी Lawrence of Arabia इसको बाद में कहा जाता था for his role which he played during this World War One. He was a very prominent figure. इसने जो है ना मुसलमानों के बीच में बहुत discontent create किया था misunderstanding and he kind of created a revolt so it earned him international fame as Lawrence of Arabia and this title was used for 1962 film which was based on his wartime activities so apart from this in Germany there was also a revolution which threw the Wilhelm II who had to flee to Holland the new democratic regime had to sign the German armistice on November 11, 1918, and that was the time when the World War One was finally over. The war, because World War One is known as the war to end all wars, and that war was finally over. So that global war was finally over. Then there were peace treaties तो हम थोड़ा पढ़ते हैं peace treaties के बारे में this was all about towards armistice ये जो peace treaties थी ना तो because after the World War One that was a massive war a huge catastrophic event in the history of mankind तो several peace treaties were signed the Treaty of Versailles with Germany the Treaty of Saint Germain with Austria Treaty of Trianon with Hungary and Treaty of Neuilly with Bulgaria and Treaty of Sèvres later named as Lausanne Treaty with Turkey. अगर हम यहाँ पे देखें तो ऑस्ट्रिया हंगरी was prior to the World War One. Austria Hungary was one combined empire, a huge empire, but later after World War One it was disintegrated into Austria and Hungary into two parts. So, peace treaties in on January 1919, the representatives of victorious countries met at the Conference of Paris, and representatives of the defeated countries were not invited to the peace conferences. ठीक है? And I told you that. And these treaties were signed with the following countries, and we'll talk about Treaty of Versailles because it has an imminent position. इसलिए क्योंकि it imposed very harsh war reparations on Germany, and this was also a reason behind that in the World War Two. This was the reason and a cause behind the breakout of the World War Two. हिटलर जो था ना उसने इसका बदला लिया था ट्रीटी ऑफ वर्सलिस का फ्रॉम द यूरोप ठीक है तो जो फ्रेंच लीडर्स थे दे वर insistently claiming that Germany will pay. The British and Americans were willing to punish Germany, but they opted for a more conciliatory attitude. And Treaty of Versailles जो है ना ये सबसे बड़ी है, and that was organized in several chapters in which each chapter have different clause ठीक है तो इसका territorial clause है military clause है war reparation है territory if you talk about the territories and so the Treaty of Versailles में जो है ना जर्मनी इट वाज साइंड विद जर्मनी और जर्मनी के जितने भी टेरिटरीज थे ना दे वर डिसइंटीग्रेटेड एंड डिवाइडेड इनटू द पावर्स द विनर्स ठीक है तो फ्रांस रीगेन्ड एलास एंड लॉरेंस then eastern territories were annexed by Poland, which caused East Prussia to become territorially isolated. Um, Germany, some of the German cities were declared free cities. Denmark was annexed, and Germany lost all of its colonies, and the victors annexed them. Military जो clause था इसका it was इसमें आया था कि there was drastic limitations on German Navy. Germany को कहा था कि ये बिल्कुल किसी किस्म की आर्मी नहीं रखेगी अपने साथ. There was a dramatic reduction of the army. और एक एरिया था जर्मनी का that was Rhineland region. It was demilitarized. उसको there was a demilitarization of Rhineland region. ठीक है war reparations जो जर्मनी पे डाले थे and that the treaty declared Germany and its allies responsible for all the loss and damage suffered by the allies, and also as a consequence, they were forced to pay the war reparations to the victors. Now, if we talk about the other peace treaties, they include a Treaty of Neuilly, which was signed with Bulgaria. That was a small Balkan country, and it suffered territorial loss in the benefit of Romania, Greece, and a new country was formed as a Yugoslavia. क्योंकि ये जो बल्गारिया एक रीजन था ना दैट वाज ऑलरेडी सो स्मॉल कंट्री आई वाज सो स्मॉल रीजन टेरिटोरियल रीजन एंड इट also suffered a territorial loss or फिर later Romania was formed Greece was formed and a new country Yugoslavia was formed एक and there is another treaty, Saint German, that was signed with Austria, and this treaty led to the disintegration of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. I told you before, the breakup of this old empire resulted in the creation of new states such as Austria, Hungary, the separate states. These were the new states. The Czechoslovakia, the former empire was were annexed by the new states such as Poland and Yugoslavia. Then this Treaty of Serbs, it was known in 1920, the Treaty of Serbs. It was signed with Turkey and later it was named as Treaty of Lausanne in 1923. ये जो Treaty of Serbs है ना it was extremely hard and it led to the Turkish national rebellion जो it was led by Kemal Atatürk This also led to the war against Greece, which occupied large areas of Anatolia. And after the अच्छा फिर ये जो Treaty of Lausanne इसको बाद में कह दिया था ना, it was signed, and it concentrated on the distribution of Turkish possessions in the Middle East region between France, Syria, Lebanon, and Britain ने लिया था Palestine, Iraq, Jordan. You know, this Ottoman Empire was disintegrated into several small states and territories: Palestine, Iraq, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. तो ये थे, and Treaty of Trianon, it was signed with Hungary. So Hungary was probably treated the worst after the war, because large Hungarian minorities were left outside the Hungarian state, and they were living as minorities in Czechoslovakia, Romania, and Yugoslavia. So, consequences of the war. The World War that emerged after the catastrophic 1914 to 1918 war was totally different from the pre-war, prior to the war. तो जो अब जो वर्ल्ड बना था, that emerged, was totally different. The most obvious were the terrible loss of life, because 8 million people were dead, millions of people were wounded. There were widows, orphans, and the material destruction. It was especially suffered by the Europe. ठीक है. However, the war also did brought some important social and ideological changes. The US, which had won the war but had not experienced a conflict on its territory, became a superpower. The mass mobilization of men led to the incorporation of women to the workforce, which was a major step forward for women's rights. जब बहुत सारे लोग लड़ाई के लिए गए थे, जो आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट मेन, ठीक है, सोल्जर्स, तो उनकी जाहिर बात है टू अर्न सम मनी, उनकी औरतें, जो घर की औरतें थी, दे वो गई थी इंडस्ट्रीज में और फैक्ट्रीज में, एंड दे वर वर्किंग. ठीक है, तो वर्क फोर्स जो था दैट वाज ट्रांसफॉर्म्ड. वो औरतों में औरतें कर रही थी काम, and then that became a major step forward for women's right. बाद में फिर women's right के लिए आवाज़ें उठी थी. ठीक है, the extreme nationalism experienced during the war, and then it coupled with the fear of communist revolution, encouraged the middle class population and some countries to move to the extreme right, and then it created a hotbed for fascist movement. लेटर जो इसके बाद वर्ल्ड वॉर टू हुआ था, तो इट क्रिएटेड दैट फाशिस्ट मूवमेंट, क्योंकि इटली में जो था, इट वो देयर वाज अ राइज ऑफ बेनितो मोसिलिनी. जापान में जो है ना, उस टाइम इट वाज अ फाशिस्ट रूलर, इट वाज हिरोहिटो. एंड इन जर्मनी इट वाज द rise of Adolf Hitler. He was extreme fascist ruler. So the Trump of Soviet revolution and the social crisis that followed the war encouraged workers in many countries to protest, and then that was creating kind of a pre-revolutionary climate. So the US was the sole winner, and the US had won the war. So the legacy of World War One. So World War One brought about massive social upheaval, because as millions of women entered into the workforce to support men who went to the war, and then they were replaced those who never came back. It was the first global war which created a deadliest ग्लोबल पैंडमिक. और स्पेनिश फ्लू फिर आया था. ठीक है, स्पेनिश फ्लू इसने जो है ना, इट वाज अ ग्लोबल पैंडमिक, एंड it raised in 1918, which killed as an estimate about 20 to 50 million people. And it is the World War One is also been referred to as the first modern warfare, because many technologies were associated with military conflict, क्योंकि machine guns थे, tanks used हुए थे, modern tanks, and aerial combats थे, the modern radio communication were introduced as a massive scale during the World War I, and then the severe effects that chemical weapons such as mustard gas and Fosgene had the soldiers and civilians during the World War I. So, but later the Geneva Convention जो हुआ था, and the agreement which was signed in 1925, it restricted the use of chemical biological agent in world warfare. ठीक है, because इसका जो effect है ना वो अभी भी है and remains in effect today as well. क्योंकि ये बहुत because these chemical and biological agents, these are a severe threat to human life, and not only human बल्कि every living being on earth. ठीक है. So okay, so summing up this World War I, World War I ended up with Treaty of Versailles because after Germany surrendered, the war took because almost 9 to 13 million lives and caused unprecedented damage. The United States did not sign a treaty because it objected to, but it was an objection to their terms. Specifically, the U.S. did not wanted to be the part of League of Nations, and the US wanted to be isolated after World War I. इसके बाद I'll try to make a video and lecture on the League of Nations because that was an international organization which was established after this catastrophic global event. तो उस that and I'll also discuss the successes and failures of a League of Nations, but let's concentrate on this topic. So, um, the US wanted to keep itself isolated from World War I because they feared that if they became a part of League of Nations, so it would drag them into more wars and future wars, and so they wanted to keep themselves isolated, and they did not want to get themselves involved in this global events. So therefore the US Senate refused to sign the treaty, and US negotiated its own sentiments with Germany in 1921. However, 2 million you know uh, died people died from having wounds, infections, because of the war environment. The World War I had big economic boom in the US, because since all the war became blame was put on Germany. Germany was in very influential place, so a dictator Hitler decided to step in and guide Germany. These are the references that helped me preparing the lecture. If you want to study more about global wars, you can visit these sites and read the following books. This marks the end of our lecture. I hope you liked the video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'll be coming up with more interesting videos of political science. We'll meet you in the next lecture. Till then, take care. Bye. Allah Hafiz.